Erasmus, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. I'm coming out of going through a pretty, I would say a pretty major, I wouldn't say major, but like a consistent healing crisis that I've been working through over the last, I don't know, maybe 9, 10 days. Um, so yeah, it's been a pretty interesting week or so since Greek Easter. But hey, man, the body knows what it needs to do. Sometimes you just have to get out of its way and let it do its thing. Um,
Yeah, for sure, man. And me too. It started for me a little bit before you. My family got pretty rocked as well. Just interesting trying to make these observations and correlations and understand the deeper conflicts that are being resolved and what's going on. But something deeper is definitely always awakening within me when I go through a process like that. I just can't help but feel that there's some kind of correlation and connection to evolution. Whether it's psychological evolution, or even in my external reality, like things shift and adjust, and the body adapts. I think even to welcome in the new things, just not just to welcome existing things, but making way for new things. And yeah,
yeah,
it's just interesting.
don't mind me as I was rubbing my tea tree mint toothpicks and then decided to just rub my eye. Like, what's going on? My eye's like burning. Oh well. Yeah, man, I
No,
think it's again, all everything in your life can be a lesson. You know what I mean? Like to
yeah.
be curious, which we'll come to this later on in the episode, but like to be curious about why things are happening, why your body is going through what it's going through, that isn't happening randomly, that there's
Hmm.
a reason for it. And so, obviously, I know I've been going through a lot the last however many months, traveling nonstop. My father passing away, like it's like my fifth East Coast trip since the end of November.
Hmm.
Other emotional factors, other things happening. So, yeah, it's been an interesting ride, but that's one of the reasons why we didn't have an episode come out this past Sunday. But uh, this episode that we recorded is incredible. So you can talk about it a little bit, bro.
Yeah, for sure. Now we'll talk about the episode, but just quickly, I want to highlight our amazing membership community, Friends of the Truth. Still there, still there. Just the amazing evolution of that community, and the way it's grown and the way the conversation continues to, I think, flourish in so many different ways. It's something that I really, really love to see personally. Like, to me, if anyone is seeking support, community, laughter, connection, with people who really, really get it and are on the same page, like, I'm just so proud of what we've created in terms of Friends of the Truth. I highly encourage you to go check that out. And
Yeah.
no one comes and regrets joining
Well,
in my view.
yeah, and I want to give a shout out to everyone in there, and I just love the grace that people approach that group with, and the respect for each other
Hmm.
and our individual paths and our views, and there's nothing dogmatic about Friends of the Truth. We have so many different subcategories where we get into all these different kinds of conversations, and of course, not everyone's going to agree on every single thing, but just the way the communication is handled, it's very conscious. Communication within the community. There's no ad hominem attacks like, oh, you idiot, I can't believe you believe that, blah, blah, blah. It's just really, yeah, I love it. I love the people in it, people from all around the world. And, we keep growing. And like you said earlier, like there's such nourishing conversations and inspiring and stimulating conversations that go on in there.
Yeah, it's just a hub for deep vulnerability, for incredible creativity, for so much growth psychologically and new information intellectually, and books, and herbs and medicines and recipes and stories. It's just so rich. Like, to me, this is the most fertile form of, online connection is that. And I love it.
And let's not forget memes that totally kind of
Toe
push
the
the
line.
envelope and toe the line, maybe cross the line in terms of quote unquote political correctness. But again, it's just I don't know, it's a place to kind of be yourself and have some fun and get deep. So I love it. So if you're listening to this and you want to come hang out with us in our community, like friendsofthetruth.co.
Yeah, we're offering basic memberships for $17 now. $17 per month. You get
So 6 calls.
six calls, It's just, yeah. Think of the things we spend $17 on.
I
Anyway.
know.
Guys, so excited about today's episode. It's been a topic of interest of mine for a long time, and it just felt more prevalent. So I reached out to our good friend David Whitehead to come back and discuss this with us because I know he's deep into this topic as well. We're talking about esoteric Christianity. We're exploring, this modern trend of individuals reverting now to fundamental Christianity, even within the quote unquote truth movement. And yeah, we look at it from a number of angles. Why do people feel the allure to return to fundamentalism? What's happening within their own psyche, and also just offering beautiful tidbits of our own personal relationships with God, and also diving deeper into the hermetic, archetypal, esoteric, the cosmology within and without relationship when it comes to this topic as well, which I think is really, really empowering. So we hope you enjoy this episode. Of all the conversations that have been had on this topic, I feel like we've done this incredible justice with this conversation, and this is something that will stand the test of time. There's no doubt about that. So get value from it, and if you do, please share it around. That's one way to really give back to what we're doing as well. Without further ado, here is David Whitehead.
You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
Welcome back to Here for the Truth, everybody. We have returning once again a man that needs absolutely no introduction to our audience, David Whitehead, Truth Warrior. David, thank you so much for being here, man.
Thanks for having me, boys. Always love talking to you. Always love being on this show. I love this show. I'm also a fan of the show, and I'm also really interested and excited about today's discussion. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Appreciate that. Yeah, well, today the highlight of this, I guess, is multi-pronged. I guess we've all been observing to some degree this phenomenon of, I guess, large collectives of people deciding to revert, or, maybe for the first time moving towards Christianity and more dogmatic and fundamentalist views of the world. So we'd like to explore that psychologically with you, and then also potentially address some of the more esoteric meanings of the Bible and some of the gold that actually can be mined there, beyond the dogma, because I think there is a lot to be mined there that can be very beneficial to individuals. So I guess in terms of an opening statement, what are you seeing in terms of, people reverting to Christianity and all of a sudden becoming quite fundamentalist in their views, even people within our quote unquote truth community, etc.?
Yeah, it's an important thing to note, and I'm glad we get to have this chat. And I just want to say right out of the gate that when we have this discussion, or from my point of view, I'm not here to attack anybody's personal belief or their spiritual journey or how they see things. Because here's the thing, there's as many variations of religious thinking as there are human beings, even though everybody likes to divide themselves into these little groups and cliques, and I'm a part of this team, and I wear this costume now, and I say these words, and I go to these churches, and I do this. In the end, everybody has their own personal experience with religion and with spirituality. And so I'm not here to attack that, because I'm a personalist, as I know both you guys are. And I believe that everybody should have, I also don't want there to be some kind of editing or destruction of these religions, or I don't want the state to come in and try to create some, law to say you can't worship under these altars. But I also have been studying Christianity and religion my entire life, as far back as I can remember. I was personally raised as a Christian, and I've been to every denominational church that you can talk about, and I've got numerous Bible translations. I've studied it with scholars. I've studied it independently. And so I have my take on it, and we'll get into that. But what I have been seeing is people, after the wake of the pandemic over the past 4 years, and we know this has been crazier than just a pandemic. I mean, it seems like everything but the kitchen sink has been thrown at the human race over the past 4 years, and has really gotten to the core of people. And I don't even blame anybody for looking for some kind of safety net, some kind of comfort in this time. And religion is that. My issue is that there's sort of an attitude of arrogance that gets developed when these newly converted people that see the light, allegedly, go into this sort of very fundamentalist, dogmatic mode of thought when it comes to religion, and we can further define that. And then they start doing the whole holier than thou thing and stating that this is the way, this is the only way to look at it. And they came to that conclusion during this time of chaos that we're going through. And then, the people that were sort of on the fence, maybe going to church once in a while, or where they're kind of humming and hawing about it during the normal times, quote unquote, they are now full blown of the cloth, saying all the lines and doing all the rituals and trying to recruit everybody. And I went, okay, well, is it really because that's the truth, or is the real truth that nobody really wants to talk about, that we're going to talk about, that there are underlying motivational factors as to why only during the hard times people are suddenly, they're good little Christians, or they're religious people now, because this is a phenomenon not just happening in the West with Christianity, it's happening all over the world. I've been speaking to friends that are telling me, everybody's going back to the Buddhist shrines in their neck of the woods, and other people are converting to Islam is the latest thing now. And other people are going deeper into the New Age stuff. And no matter where it is, even in the UFO stuff, there's like a deeper religious vibe coming out of that now. And so there's this feeling in general that I've been noticing, that people are going back to their traditions, whatever they were raised with, whatever their parents raised them with, they're going back to those traditions. And so why is that? Is it because that's part of the Great Awakening? Or is this because this is a way of dealing with trauma? And this is what brings in psychology and other things as well that could be motivational factors. And so what I started to see was these sort of newly converted people going out and trying to beat you over the head with their dogma. They weren't doing that when times were good. They weren't doing that when the economy was a little bit better, when there wasn't wars popping up every week, when there wasn't government tyranny rising its ugly head all over the place and threatening their lives, when there wasn't a deep sense of fear coming out of every part of the media. They weren't in that mode. That mode only clicked on in their heads when we saw this vicious other cult come in with this new wokeism, and radical leftism came in. And I think what maybe happened was the people that were, maybe just on the fence about spirituality and religion went, oh my God, that is so abhorrent. That is so opposite to my values, that radical leftism that we're seeing, or whatever you want to call it, this new wokeism stuff. I'm just going to go back to my traditions. It just seems safer. I don't want to lose that. And there's some positives to that as well, but there's also some negatives, because we get to the jump to conclusions, Matt, and we start drawing conclusions where I think we should be analyzing this a little deeper and asking ourselves why. So is the motivation of this sudden need to jump back into religious thought of this type, the dogmatic kind, the externalist kind, the literalist kind, is that born out of an authentic thing? Or is it coming from an inauthentic place to further abnegate responsibility, to ease the anxiety, to find a source of comfort, to find a source of hope, and, which comes from a virtuous place? But are we jumping out of one net into another net? That's my concern. Some people are going to find that controversial and hurtful or whatever. But it's funny how the people on the so-called right or conservative, which typically end up coming from a more Christian guise, will critique anyone on the left for their feelings being hurt and all the censoring and all that happening. Yet I started to notice this same exact phenomena taking place within these fundamentalist types. And I went, So I've been taking notes and studying psychology on Unslaved for a long time. And there's a lot that I have to say about this. So it's a great opening section there to start.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, David. I think in the most simplistic way of looking at it, for me at least, is that it seems human beings, or the majority of people, have difficulty with uncertainty. That just to hold it within themselves psychologically, somatically, that they don't have the capacity for it. And so it's I need to latch on to something. And you refer to this when you were talking too, to something that's going to make me feel more certain, make me feel so secure. So my nervous system can handle it on some level. And it seems obvious to me when I look around. Yes, there's many different threads around it, but I just think in a very simple way, it's like, can I sit with uncertainty and not knowing that there is this mystery out there, but no, I have to latch on to something so I can feel good and feel taken care of and feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I was actually bringing this up in a recent pod. I've been doing a few pods on this, and I did some premiums on my Truth Word Premium, diving deep into this, just giving people another take. You know, what's one more out of the 50,000 different takes on the Bible? Like, geez. And it's this thing where, what if you think about religion, and you could look at all the religions like this, they're all just various cults of interpretation. That's what they are. And so then my question was, well, if we could just say, all right, all of religion and all the different denominations and splinter groups and fractured little cults here and there everywhere are just cults of interpretation. What are they interpreters for? What are they interpreting? Well, the religion, there's a very powerful aspect to it. There's a need for it in humanity, it appears to be. And that is to interpret something. Well, what are we interpreting? We're interpreting what you highlighted, Erasmus, which is the mystery. And this starts with ancient man, and we can also correlate it to modern men. In ancient times, the mystery was nature. What powers nature? What turns it on and off? What moves the sun and the moon and the stars? What changes the weather systems? What is the human condition? Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? What's the purpose of life, etc.? The mystery of what makes the flowers bloom, and then the season comes with the fall and everything dies and then it's reborn again. Where does the sun go at night? Why can't we see it? Why are we left in darkness and cold and exposed to the predators and the uncertainty of the night? And then what kind of fear does that install in the human consciousness over time? And then how does that translate to other fears that we have in our lives? And so there's sort of like the primal, I think of it as like the primal curiosity of humanity to explore the mystery of what plugs nature in. How does it work? Everything we make as humans has a cause. Like when we make wheelbarrows and we make farming tools and houses and buildings and bridges, we know because we made it what the cause was, but we don't know what the cause was of what produced all the woods and the metals and everything else, right? What produced the energy in our bodies. You know, you see people walking around with light in their eyes and they're talking, and they have personalities, and then they die and suddenly that light is gone. And then we look up at the sun, thinking from ancient man's perspective, and we see, oh, the light goes away every night. And we're just hoping it comes back, because if it doesn't, we all freeze to death. We get eaten by the predators. It's not good. We can't see. We have horrible night vision, right? But then it comes up every day, and thank goodness that light of the world returns and gives us the photosynthesis so plants can grow and the crops can grow and we can be warm and you know. So you can imagine that interpreting the mystery was the first anxiety that humanity had, because there was an anxiety that came with this. It wasn't just this like, oh my God, it's just this amazing mystery, I can't wait to explore it. It was more like, what in the actual F is going on? I can't control that. I can't control the sun. I can't control the tides. I can't control the hurricanes and whether the ground is going to open up and swallow us all in an earthquake. Like, I can't control it. So ancient man had this deep traumatic experience with nature, as well as this like awe-inspiring experience with nature. And so to me, that's the formulation of the story in all the religions of the Horus and Set, you know, the Jesus and the devil, the opposing forces, the yin and the yang, constantly battling it out. And it starts literally with the story of light and darkness. And that's to me what religion is. It's not the story of some guy that lived thousands of years ago, although we can get into the historical connections because there are historical connections woven into it. But ultimately, I'm trying to think of big picture. What motivated this need for religion? And I think it starts with that. It starts with trying to solve the mystery, because here's the deal. Humans fear what we don't understand, right? Mm-hmm. I always bring up that Falcone guy, the guy in Batman, when he's like, you know, we always fear what we don't understand, right? And that's the truth. We do fear what we don't understand. And what we don't understand is we don't understand the mystery of who we are, or our bodies, how we work, what life and death is. We don't understand how nature works, and we don't understand the chaos of the world. And so what do? We try to find comforting certainties. We prefer comforting certainties over uncomfortable uncertainties, even if those uncomfortable uncertainties are actually the doorway to the great mystery, which is what we have to try to deal with as human beings in this life. It's part of our challenge here, is to navigate life without all the answers. And there are many traditions and great thinkers that tried to inspire people to become comfortable with the mystery and trying to say, it's okay that we don't have all the answers. And it's actually the fact that it's a mystery that inspires us towards greatness and inspires us towards getting these answers. But the people that tap out early, to me, are the ones that go the fundamentalist route and say, no, I've had enough of the mystery. I've had enough of this trying to figure it out on my own. I need someone else to save me from it. And so when I hear this thing about being saved, I don't always see people necessarily wanting to be saved from sin or saved from the wiles of the devil. I think in many cases, they want to be saved from personal responsibility. They want to be saved from the fear and anxiety that's induced by the mystery. And they want to be saved from thinking for themselves. And if we saw the blueprint of the vast majority of humanity, Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, all of them, in COVID, not happy with the mystery, not happy with any kind of internal solutions or personal responsibility there. And yet now we're going to be lectured by them, even though they all fell for that. We're going to be lectured by them about how we have to go that dogmatic route in order to solve the great mystery. I just felt like, no, there's some contradictions that we need to talk about. And I think there are psychological factors motivating this more than some truly authentic spiritual motivation. Although that's not, I don't want to paint a general brush, but that's just kind of what I'm starting to see, and that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think you hit the nail on the head, because especially initially, it's like ancient, man. It was the reverence of the mystery that actually moved one towards God, right? It was the awe of it. It was the reverence of it. And that was actually like when we wrote parables and drew symbols and created stories, like this was a very right hemisphere brain, the connection with self and reality, imbued with imagination and creativity. But then over time, these stories, these symbols, these parables got hijacked into black and white dogmatic ways of perceiving the world. And we shifted into this left hemisphere dominated world where we live in fear, we live in doubt, we're scared of the bigger picture, we're scared of the mystery. And I think at some point, social engineers, architects of control, whatever you want to call them, realized that this was actually a strong mechanism of control for the populace and for the masses. But it's that discomfort and that uncertainty within and without that actually moves you towards godliness. It moves you closer to understanding oneself, to being connected to all that is, et cetera, et cetera. When we put firm rules in place, we disconnect ourselves from that, right? We cut ourselves away from that source, in my view.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it in terms of the debate we're having in the social political world right now, where everybody's talking about freedom and liberty and free speech and don't censor me, right? It's interesting that some of the voices that were out there the loudest in this movement were Christian conservatives in Canada, and everywhere else that I saw. And they were the ones saying, I want freedom. I don't want censorship. Everybody, don't censor me because I don't want to take the jabs or whatever. And then when I would go out and present a different interpretation of the Bible, they would be all up in arms telling me that my ideas were dangerous. I literally had people like friends of mine telling me, your ideas are dangerous. And I'm like, dangerous? Like, what do you mean dangerous? Like, should my views be censored then if they're dangerous? Like, and we are the people that were just talking 5 minutes ago about not censoring people when it comes to pharmaceutical stuff or the government or free speech. So, again, the contradiction is everybody wants everybody else to think like them. And the reason that motivation exists is because that builds security. That gives the false sense of security that if everybody thinks the way I do, I'm on the right track. And look what it did. I just keep using this pandemic as a great example of this. If we just zoom out, that the reason we had all these sort of COVID Karens and all this stuff running around, trying to police the world and make everybody stand on the X and wear the 2 masks or whatever, is coming from the idea that the same thing. They want everybody to act in a similar way, a collectivized way. It's collectivism, right?
Yeah.
And then you have all these Christians out there speaking the libertarian ideals and freedom and all of this. But then on the other day, it's totally the opposite. It's no, we want more collectivism. We need Christianity to become the dominant religion. And if you're not going to be a Christian right now, you're not standing for Western civilization, because of course, everybody knows that Western civilization is entirely founded upon the basis of Christianity, which we're going to get into that as absolutely not the case. There's a major part of it, but it's not the whole story by a long shot. You just jumped into the movie halfway through in your studies. So, this is where I come in and I say, look, we can all have our different interpretations of this stuff. Totally cool, right? But the moment people are out there trying to recruit me and call me up and send me messages and emails, and I have people that literally mail me hundreds of dollars worth of Christian books and paraphernalia to try to convert me. Now we have to have this discussion where we have to just say, look, what happened to that respect for individuality and letting people look at it their own way? And what happened to agreeing to disagree? Right? What happened to that? And then the deeper question that you're bringing up, Joel, which is there a corruption factor behind the doors of religion, all religion, that nobody really wants to talk about? It's funny how, too, what I noticed when I was growing up, because I've had these questions since I was a kid, I would often ask my parents, who were very fundamentalist, like Pentecostal, at the time. And I would just say, why does my grandmother, who is a Catholic, she has a totally different interpretation of the Bible than you guys do? And they're like, well, yeah, but the Catholics are evil. They have it wrong. And I was like, okay. And then I go talk to the Catholics, like, no, those Pentecostals, they come from the Protestant Reformation and they're a bunch of bollocks. It's only the Vatican and the Catholic Church that has the way and the true interpretation. And then they're like, okay. And then the Jehovah's Witnesses would come around and tell me, no, all those guys are all wrong. We have the right one, the Mormons. And then you just keep going. And then I went, oh my God. So this whole thing, nobody even agrees within its own corpus. They don't agree. And then you go up the road and you talk to a Buddhist and you talk to a Muslim and you go to talk to a rabbi. And then there's all these different variations of those. And they're all fighting with each other over the interpretations of these things. And I'm like, where does it all source to? Oh, it's a book, ancient writings. Well, geez, I mean, if you think your media and your education system was manipulated and maybe misunderstood in many regards, what do you think happened to your religious houses? And I just found it interesting that if I talk to any Christian or any particular religious person, they might agree with me on the corruption, the globalism, the stuff we talk about on the political level. And they'll say, yeah, that big pharma got infiltrated. Absolutely. Yeah. And the government got infiltrated by these Marxists or these fascists or whatever, and the media and the education system. And then there's the Epstein client list. And yeah, there's corruption everywhere and we shouldn't trust anybody. And that's the vibe, right? And then you go, well, does that in any way possibly carry over to some of our sacred cows in religion and the history of these books and what these priests have taught us? Is there a difference between maybe the original Christianity that nobody wants to talk about, that we're going to talk about, and the type of Christianity that you're taught about by the priesthood? Is there anything even remotely suspicious to you about how these religions have been used as whips of control of the masses for centuries? And it's actually one of the first perfected forms of mind control when it comes down to the level we're talking about here. And nobody wants to have that discussion. But they'll say, well, all you're saying there is right, David, but only about all the other denominations that are wrong, or only the other religions that I'm not a part of. But the one I've just converted to last week that I have never really studied, that one is the pure one that's been untouched and guided by God's hand throughout history to remain intact. So come and join me. And I just have to say, we're going to have a deep chat, because I think that of all of those institutions, the religious institutions are number one on the list to be investigating for misinterpretation, mistranslation, the priestcraft, the manipulation, and the system of control, because that is absolutely undeniably part of that history. It's not the whole history. I'm not saying it's all bad, but the fact that we can't even talk about those blights tells me a lot.
Yeah. Abs, you're on mute, Erasmus.
It's so far back for so many people. Like they can get their heads around pharma or some government corruption, but when you talk about religion, I mean, it goes back how many years? And I feel like there's something with religion that sits at the core of a person's identity. And when your identity is challenged to a certain degree, that's when you know, the battles start happening in that regards. You know, I just think it's so interesting because I grew up religious, you know, maybe not like hardcore, like dogmatic Christian, but I was Greek Orthodox and I was in Sunday school. Like I had perfect attendance Sunday school for however many years, like 12 years. I was an altar boy. Like I spoke in religious competition, religious speaking competitions. And like, I remember I used to mess with my mom. I was like, well, mom, if I was born in another country, I'd have a different religion. You know, I would just, it wouldn't be what we have. What do you say about that? And it's like, there's no answer for that. But this is what we believe. This is what we believe. Like I just happen to be born into a family and that's just the costume I have to wear, you know, being a Christian, being a Buddhist, being a Jew. And it's like, I just feel like it takes away my freedom to explore what life is and who I am.
Yeah.
Well, and isn't that interesting? Just to point that out. Sorry, Joel, just point what you just said is that like, this was my question too. And I went, yeah, like I was even talking about my brother who's fundamentalist top to bottom. We've been debating this for years and I love him. Love you, bro. But the thing is I'm like, look, we were born and raised in this Christian ideology. And so it makes sense that when shit gets hard, we go to that as our saving grace, right? And then my buddy up the road who comes from Lebanon, he might go to a different thing, or you go Greek Orthodox, or someone born in the Middle East is going to go back and find Islam again, or the Jews up the road are suddenly not going to just be secular Jews anymore. They need to have a real something, you know, like, and on we go. So, you know, it is interesting that has a massive part of it, which does tell us that a lot of our identity is not crafted internally outwards. It's crafted externally inwards. Mm-hmm. And what does that say if we're trying to talk about the truth ultimately? Are we on the track of the truth when we're operating from that place? Are we, the most people I speak to that develop a fundamentalist approach to any kind of religion haven't really explored all of the religious ideas that are out there. They've kind of rested on one and stayed there. And that's fine, totally cool. But when then they start to say, this is the only way, my God is bigger than yours, my interpretation trumps all the others, and not even just stop there, but to say all the others are damned for eternity. They are evil. They are like, that is where I start to come in and say, all right, hold on. Let's try to look at it all side by side and actually find out something really interesting, which is that all these religions are ultimately telling you the exact same story about light and darkness and the whole thing, just with different costumes, names, personalities, cultural motifs embedded into it. But it's all the same. It's the story that I was telling you about, trying to explain and interpret the great mystery. And what kind of an idea would actually unite the world versus destroy the world with war after war after war? Would it be the idea that we're all against each other and it's only one versus the other? Or would it be the idea that, hey, we were all telling the same story the whole time, just through different lenses? You know, what would bring more peace to the world? And it's funny how people don't want to go the route of unifying these ideas. They want to keep them divided. And who benefits from that?
Yeah, and they don't want peace. They don't want peace ultimately because they gain their identity from the other by being against the other. You know, that's a big piece of it too. And I think Michael has said that to us on a podcast in the past.
Yeah.
See, I completely understand how these mechanisms of control and how this regression can take place within the masses. But to be frank, our audience are truth seekers. We're talking to people who identify as truth seekers, to be interested in the truth, etc., etc. And this is where my angst comes into play, is when so-called truth seekers, you know, all of a sudden regress, and it's like Jesus is the truth. It's like, what does that mean? What does that talismanic statement even mean? How is that definable? How is that comprehended in any objective terms whatsoever? You know, and so like I get it for the masses. I don't get it when it comes to like truth seekers, the truth world, truth community, etc. Like for me, like when this happens in my head, I'm like, did you ever even really take the first step towards truth, towards self-knowledge, for this to be able to have such magnetism on you at this point in time? Like, I question that.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. And I've been saying this lately because, you know, my usual diatribe is to kind of say, oh, this sort of literalist interpretation of the Bible or any of these texts, right? And then I sometimes start to go, well, maybe we didn't take them literally enough. Because if we say this statement, which will be the repeating it from what it says in the Bible, where you have the characters telling you who they are. Jesus is telling you, I am the truth and the light. I am the truth and the light. So he's telling you what character he's playing in the story. Imagine this, like you just have to adjust your settings a little tiny bit. You don't have to do a big leap here, okay? Go from him saying, I am the truth, to saying the character that you're reading in this story, that's a beautiful story in many regards, and it's universal. It's universal. It's as old as history. It's been told in many different ways, that they're telling you what the character is. I am the truth and the light. That's the role I'm playing in this story.
Yeah.
I am an imago, an archetypal character for you to project onto. And the reason they wrote it like this, the ancient writers, and I'm talking pre-Council of Nicaea, because don't forget, Council of Nicaea, all they did was bring a whole bunch of bishops and priests and people together to vote on which of the ancient manuscripts that formulated the Bible were to be kept in the final cut, which were to be edited, and which were to be cast aside, which we now call those books the Apocrypha, right?
Mm-hmm.
And men decided this. Men, okay? And so you go, all right, so why did they select these and not the others? We can get into those debates. But in the end, you go, well, you're reading ancient works, ancient writings from ancient minds, and they borrowed from each other over thousands of years. There's nothing but appropriation in all of these religions. Nothing completely unique and authentic about them. When you start going through and comparing them, right? There's differences, but it's really just the same basic structure. So my thing was, well, what was the original? And that's why I went to writers like Alvin Boyd Kuhn, Manly Hall,
Massey,
Reverend Robert Taylor, and many, many others who came through and they said, and these are guys writing, some of them in the 1800s, 1700s, even before. And they're saying, look, it's a beautiful story that you're being told, but it's the greatest story ever told, right? It's actually because it's the only story that's ever been told. You can watch Marvel Avengers, Batman, Superman, I don't care what. They're putting a template of a type of story into those stories.
Yeah.
And that's why they're blockbuster films. That's why Star Wars is blockbuster films. It's a story of Horus and Set, Jesus and the devil, the dark side and the light side, Darth Vader, the sun, the whole thing. Like, it's all there. They're telling you a story, all right. They're telling you a true story in the Bible, 100%. But you have to have the keys of decipherment to know what they're talking about. And then you also need to know that on top of that, you're looking at something that has also been manipulated and translated in very particular ways in the modern guys that deviates from the original. Mm-hmm. And so when you go to the original, you're going to see that there's some Christianity, all right, but it doesn't originate from where people think it does. It's not the story people think it is, and it goes far older than people think it does. And what they're doing is telling you a Shakespearean play, because a version of the story. And just to finish this point, the ancient mind was different than the modern mind. And I think it was Erasmus or Joe, I can't remember who brought it up, with this idea of a left brain dominant way of seeing things, right? Think about this conundrum that the modern Christian has to resolve. You have modern Christians who will go after the cult of materialism, which is left brain dominant scientism and all that stuff, and go, oh, you guys are all, you're a Darwinian evolution and all that stuff is nonsense because you're too much, you're too scientifically minded. You're not spiritual enough. But then you go, yeah, but you're reading these ancient, highly translated stories, and you're reading it through the lens of a literalist left brain mind. Mm-hmm. But it was originally written in a right brain type of modality, right?
Yeah.
So that means that when they were writing it, these were stories to inspire something within you and try to explain the phenomena, the mystery, and all of that through a play, which is why, like, we do it today. It started with the campfire stories, and now it's evolved into IMAX theaters, where you've got people lined up around the block who know they're about to go in and watch a movie. They go buy their popcorn, they pay their ticket, they leave their real world, and they go into the right brain world to sit there and be stunned by Hollywood, to be having an experience in the right brain, right? Mm-hmm. In the imagination. And they know that they're doing it. But when you're in the theater and you're watching 4 or whatever it is, you're realizing you're watching a movie, but the movie pulls you in. And that's why it's a good movie, is because it pulls you in and it makes you believe for a while. And then when the movie's over, the credits roll and you got to get all your shit and go back out and start your car. Your car won't start. You ran out of gas and suddenly reality hits you and you're back in the real world again. Well, what I think of ancient scripture and all these writings is different poetic, archetypal, symbolic stories. That's the Hollywood of the past. That's the final pinnacle of what maybe evolved around the campfire, telling those tales, looking up at the stars, and then making them into characters and stories and telling those stories in different ways, and then weaving in historical elements into that telling. And so that's how I see it. And I think that when you see it like that, it'll make sense of why there's so many different denominations, so many competing religions and cults, and everybody walking around saying mine is the way and yours isn't. And in the end, we're getting down to personalism, because yours is the way, but you're choosing collectivism as the way to say it's your way, which is a contradiction. And then you're trying to read and interpret ancient people that wrote in a much more right-brained guise through layered, veiled writings. And you're trying to interpret that through the modern left brain. And to me, that's one of the biggest contradictions that exists. And that's why I think there's so much misunderstanding.
Yeah, man. And maybe this script and this theater and this, these movies that they were producing were actually meant to be hints and stories to explore your own personal inner world, right? Maybe there's an esoteric component to this. Maybe ancient man who looked up at the stars and formed the constellations into certain symbols and images and archetypes. Maybe that told him something about his own psyche, about his own nature, right? And maybe the true initial intention of religion was for you to know yourself through these stories, through these symbols, through this imagination. And yet you have your complete abomination today, which tells you to turn away from sacred images. Do not look at them. It's actually better to murder than to take in an image and to feel it and to sit with it, to have absolutely zero interest in self-knowledge, to not pursue that on any level whatsoever. And doesn't that make you think on some level that maybe a concoction was taking place? Maybe a distortion happened at some point along the road. And I look at the main collective states of the religious folk and what drives them, and it's extreme guilt. It's shame for the fact that they live. It's fear of what could happen. And they enter into this deeply antagonistic relationship with oneself. I feel bad for the fact that I live. I feel bad for the fact that I desire. I feel bad for the fact that I'm interested in myself. Yet this moral blanket code, which I've accepted, tells me this is wrong. And so I'm constantly at war with myself, right? And then I look at, for example, David Hawkins' map of consciousness, and everything that exists within force, 200 or below, guilt, fear, shame. These are all the things, these lower levels of consciousness, which religion drives into a human being. So to me, when I think about the primary weapon of control, the fact that the majority of human beings are at war with the fact that they live, that's the first step. How is anyone supposed to develop self-esteem, self-love, self-respect, things of this nature that are going to drive them towards potential and growth and actualization and evolutions of consciousness when they're trapped in this lower level because of this moral blanket code which they've accepted without proof? And the fact that they've accepted it without proof is a destruction of their reason. So they can't even trust themselves to now reason through life and through reality because they've accepted something without proof. And they've done damage at that fundamental level straight up.
Oh, yeah. No, and I think that's where we come in and say, all right, either you're reading the Bible correctly, and that's what it induces in you, which means you should be questioning the real writers of those books. That's one way of looking at it. The other argument that someone like Alvin Boyd Kuhn would make would be that the original writers of these stories, which were transposed over time throughout these different traditions and sprinkled here and there, who they were just pillaging the lost archive of the original stories, okay? That you could actually look at it as it's a warped interpretation of what was meant by those stories.
Yeah.
It's like you go back into the theater and you're watching that Marvel Avengers thing, okay? Does it really matter if the Marvel Avengers are right now actually going around in the physical world fighting villains and actually existing and having the Avenger Tower with Tony Stark, and does that really matter are we going to send teams of people all over the edges of the earth or whatever to find, evidence of Thor and his hammer and, all that? Or does it really matter the point of the story?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, and I try to say that I ask this to people that need it to be, no, I need Jesus to have a Facebook page and an address and he looks exactly like this blonde-haired, blue-eyed superhero, right? Which I'm like, dude, the guy was a Jew. He clearly didn't look like that. But anyways, the symbol of Jesus, which you try to find me a picture of Jesus on the internet without the sun being in the background of it, is trying to inspire your inner son. What about that? And just listen to what he tells you in the Bible. He says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, right?
Yep.
Well, where's the kingdom of heaven? If I ask any kid, this was Jordan Maxwell's thing. He's like, ask a kid, where's heaven? They're going to point up. Oh, it's up there. Well, what's up there? A bunch of stars and planets moving around and suns and moons. And there's a whole thing going on. Wow. And this would have interested ancient man because ancient man didn't have TikTok. They weren't busy, doing weird dances on TikTok. They were mapping the entire constellations and like totally looking at nature in a different way. And so they wrote it in a symbolic guise because there's a reason why myth is important. It's not a lie. It's because that's how your brain thinks. Mm-hmm. That's how you think. That's why there's lineups around the block for new movies coming out that everybody knows are not historical. They're not real. But there's something about the movie, the story that pulls you in. And then Christ gives it away when he says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. And they go, where's the kingdom of heaven? And he says very specifically, so please, I don't want a bunch of Christians emailing me saying, you're taking it out of context. No, I am not. The Christ says very explicitly, it is neither here nor there. It is within you. And you can go through the verses and check it out. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Or another translation will say, the kingdom of heaven is in your midst. Same thing. It's in your midst. It's in your midsection. It's in the midst of you. It's the spirit within you. It's everything within you. And then before the grand exit of the Savior, what does he tell everybody? Everything I can do, you can do in greater. Basically saying you are infused with the Christ, with the Son, with the light. You are the light and the truth. And he says it, I am the light of the world.
Yeah.
A few chapters later, ye are the light of the world. God is light. That's what I got into in this presentation I did called Children of Light, where I went through the Bible and I looked up as many verses on light as I could. And wow, the numerology, the symbolic nature of it, the fact that they're alluding to you being the light, and the whole process of the story is for you to become that Christed, enlightened being. And any good teacher worth their salt would not set themselves above you. They would say, meet me in that field of knowledge. Meet me in the field of truth. I will show it to you myself. You will then now embody that light and that truth, and you will go forth. This is the whole message. You become the disciple. You become the new. But everybody misinterpreted that as a very literalist kindergarten interpretation that was given to them by these priesthoods who knew, hey, if we can teach this to the illiterate masses, because let's not forget that reading and writing's only existed for a few hundred years and mostly amongst the elite classes, okay? So most of the people that bought into these things were taught them and couldn't even read the books themselves. And there's only been a thing called Bible study for maybe the last 200 years or less, meaning we actually studied it and went into translations, right? So they come in and they say, yeah, guys, the Marvel Avengers is real. And Thor's going to come back and save you from evil. And you don't have to, you just got to, all your sins are forgiven if you just say these mantras and roll these beads and confess to these pedophilic priests. Yeah, that's going to make everything great. Well, here's my final rebuttal. Look at the state of the world. Christianity's had thousands of years to make its case. All the religions have. And we're more war-torn, divided, and corrupted, and evil running and oozing out of every possible corner, and nobody wants to look behind the curtain of their own gates. And evil runs this place, okay? It's not the only force at work in the world, but goddamn is it up pretty high up on the totem pole. And yet, where is the benefits of these religious institutions when they themselves are loaded to the gills with drug addicts, pedophiles, criminals, chiselers and scam artists, so this is where you got to go look. At the very least, just go in and in every Christian and every Mason and every Jewish, go in and cleanse your own house before lecturing the world about who's got the better authority when it comes to the truth. And I've just got this little quote to finish this little rant here. Comes from Alvin Boyd Kuhn. I've been reading this a lot because this is the take that of all this research I've done, this is the take that I personally agree with. And he says, religious books have been written, if written at all, in cryptic form, with truth heavily veiled under the garb of cipher and symbol. Figures and glyphs had to be devised that would convey meaning to the initiated, but then conceal it from the uninstructed. To interpret archaic literature, one must learn to discern the intent of the truth under the disguise of designed duplicity in the telling. A lot there, but I think he sums it up, and we can dive into that a little more if you guys want.
Now, a short break from the episode.
If you're enjoying this episode and, thoughts are percolating and ideas are coming to the front and there's things you want to communicate about, we're discussing all these topics in depth inside our community, Friends of the Truth. We have a channel even, committed to this podcast and to these episodes and to discussions around it. We'd love to get to know you, hear your thoughts, and you get the chance to engage in dialogue directly with us about these conversations. So to learn more about that and our amazing community, hit the link in the bio or head to friendsofthetruth.co.
Back to the episode.
Yeah, man, I'd love to dive into that in more detail for sure, man. I love where this is going. And just exploring more of the esoteric elements and the symbolic elements.
But this is the thing that I want to kind of preface this with. Like, these stories, like the esoteric nature of this, was it really ever designed for the masses?
Not
right?
The esoteric side. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the esoteric side, no. Yeah, you're right.
Like, this was designed for quote unquote the initiated, and you become initiated when you learn symbolic literacy, when you connect the right brain and the left brain, and you become more whole. And these images and these stories are able to really tell you something deep about yourself, So even for me, the whole premise that there's going to be a religious or a spiritual teaching that's going to awaken the masses on some, kind of collective level, I question that in general, because I think even back then, they'd realize that the majority of people aren't interested in self-knowledge. They aren't interested in self-responsibility and the evolution of consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I think maybe some of the distortion that's taken place is that it's been attempted to be interpreted for the masses, when in reality, it actually cannot be. It's individuals who walk through the narrow gate, the road less taken, the road that leads to life.
Well said, man. That was a brilliant insight. You're so right on with that. And, it's funny how you bring up this idea of the masses never thirsting after truth. There's a brilliant quote from Gustave Le Bon, who did that book on the crowd, where he was talking about how the masses, they've seen this. It's just, you can understand it by studying basic history and social psychology, that the masses never thirst after truth, because the mass mind is the abnegation completely of the individual mind. And the individual mind is the only thing that can actually judge and be objective and think for itself and deviate from social norms if they go against the grain, right? And like, think about how we watched, again, the pandemic was such a brilliant thing for us to witness human behavior. And I took tons of notes on that when I was studying it, because I realized that so many people that were close to me, that before all the media hit with all their very specially crafted propaganda, they were on my side about, yeah, we shouldn't trust the media. Yeah, there's some problems with pharma. Yeah, there's problems with government. And then the moment this new fear came in, suddenly that all goes out the window, right? And I went, all right, so you're not necessarily looking for the truth. You're looking for comforting certainties. That's what you need. You need comforting certainties to get you through the storm of your fear, right? So all they got to do is generate fear, and then you're going to go to them for comforting certainties, and those comforting certainties may or may not be true. So if you're stuck in the collective mind, your IQ just dropped a bunch of points, because you're not thinking independently. You're not activating your reason in that holistic spectral thinking you're talking about there, Joel, right?
Yeah.
So that's what the notice is that if we understand that the base instinct of the vast majority of people out there is to run away from uncomfortable truths and to seek comforting certainties, all the cults in the world are the dealers in that drug of comforting certainties. That's what they all are.
Exactly.
Is they're promising you things. And by way of promise, good men are enslaved. And the thing is, and what's the reason why? The final thing would be the reason why most people run away from the truth is because the truth strikes fear in them, because it motivates them to actually take some action in their lives and actually think outside of the box and actually be uncomfortable for a while. That's what the nature of truth is. And most people want to avoid that like the plague. They want the easy life. They want a one-seasoned approach. They want a bunch of cookie cutter 12-step programs.
Yeah.
And they want externalized saviors and false projections. They don't want the internal road, you know?
That's right, man. And like, the real fear is not Satan or the devil. The real fear for them is actually being more conscious. It's actually self-responsibility. And like Jung spoke to this, right? He called the greatest sin is man's need for unconsciousness. M. Scott Peck called the original sin laziness. And really what the truth strikes at or brings up in these individuals is the undeniable recognition that for them to live on earth, they actually need to turn towards the light. They need to attempt to become more conscious, which requires effort, which requires work, which requires you stepping into the pits of uncertainty and discomfort, et cetera, you know? And so you're right. It's always the insidious convenience, the insidious comfort. It's like, here's a blanket, but it's offered to you literally by the devil, right? It's like, here, go to sleep. You don't need to work. You don't need to awaken. You don't need to exert the effort to live life as a conscious, self-responsible human being. And this is the ultimate fear for people, the fact that, I actually need to knit my own blanket. I need to create my own safety. I need to be my own friend, my own support network. I need to be able to navigate life by my own mind, by my own hands, et cetera. And so, of course, we'll take any support that's offered to us, regardless of where it's coming from.
Yeah, I think part of turning towards the light too for the individual is shining the light on the darkness that exists within you and the potential for darkness that exists. Because I think most people want to just see themselves as like good people and then project externally to others that they're the evil ones. That religion is the evil one, not mine, of course. Or it's just like, can you put your arm around these parts of you, these aspects of you, without the need to project them externally? And this goes back to, again, like, the message of knowing yourself at the end of the day. This is the shit that I love. I want to know all of me, all of my potential, all those thoughts that are coming in. Where are they coming from? What is it? Oh, that's interesting that I just had that thought in that moment. Whoa. Yeah. Like, I don't want to push it down under the covers. Like, I want to be curious about like why the most fucking outrageous thought just came into my mind. Whereas I think a lot of people, they don't have that capacity. Again, going back to what I said earlier, to stand between the tension of opposites, to experience all the colors of being human, of this universe that exists within them, and I think that is what's necessary for a person that's on this more authentic path of seeking truth.
And that's the ultimate question. What if God is inclusive of the evil? What if God includes the dark? What if Set, Satan, Lucifer are also aspects of this entire system that we refer to as God? What if it's all necessary, right?
Like, we'll throw away the bad stuff, and then the good stuff is what my religion's all about, or God is, or what Jesus is. Not to mention, if Jesus existed and he was a human being, he had a fucking unconscious. You know what I'm saying? And he probably was navigating certain things, which I know some stories in the Bible, in certain Gospels explore. But who talks about that?
Well, it's an example, like, and that's the thing is, I just say, what's the difference? Like, okay, my question would be to that fundamentalist person that needs, a Jesus that has a Facebook page and an address, and he's coming back soon. He's just up the road. He's got a little break going on, and he's going to be back. Is why does that external person? Why is that the focus? Why are you focused on the man? It's like Bruce Lee's little great thing in the movie when he's like, it's like a finger pointing to the moon.
Hmm.
Don't concentrate on the finger or you're going to miss all the heavenly glory. I think that's what religion has done on purpose. And I think people like that. They prefer to miss all the heavenly glory because they'd rather focus on the finger pointing to the moon. And the finger pointing to the moon is all these externalized saviors and priests and cults and doctrines and books. When you're like, well, what's the point of those things? What was the message of the Christ, right? What was the message of these, say, Moses or Buddha or Krishna or Mithra or God, a billion other saviors that have existed for humanity since they were sacrificing people on altars to try to, make it rain. What the amount of crazy, freaky ass cults that exist in this world, I don't think people even want to know how bad it is. Okay. And that's what I spent my last 10 years of my life studying. And when I came out of that was pattern recognition. And I've started to notice I even noticed the way they talk about this stuff and the desperation and there's a sort of tone that's taken, this authoritative tone that these religious types start to adopt, where there's no open-mindedness now. They are now telling you the truth. They're going to sit you down and tell you what it is. And you're like, well, how could you know that? How could you so what's your source of it? Well, it's the Bible. And it's like, okay, what does the Bible say? Well, it says this. Yeah, but it's interpreted by you. I go up the road, dude up the road has a different interpretation. So what's your premise now? Right. And then you try to say, look, the way we can understand this and fix all the contradictions and all the misunderstandings is by looking at it through this esoteric lens that's actually pointing at you the whole time. The whole time it's pointing at you. So I advocate, if people were to say, well, Dave, what do you believe? Like, do you believe in God? Do you believe in all this? I would say, yeah, I believe in God in the sense that once stripped of all the baggage of that word and understanding that, God is just good with an O missing, right? And the devil is just evil with a D added to it. And we understand it as a concept, right? Not as like people. We understand it as a concept, a greater force, or something that's actually happening both externally in nature and also internally in my psyche. We can understand them as principles and forces, and we can actually connect. But to understand, we can connect to it. But to understand who and what is this thing we call God that we've named and decorated and dressed up in so many different ways, I let it be a mystery. I just say it's the all. It's indefinable. When I talk to God, meaning I go to my sacred places in nature, or even just when I'm sitting here and I talk and I think and I have meditation and prayer and all these things, I don't need a figurine that looks like me staring back at me in order to reference that. I don't need a book to read some words in it in order to know that. I can have a dialogue directly with that. And I've felt that my entire life. And I don't know what that is. I'm happy calling it, I can call it God if people like that term. I can call it the light. I can call it a spirit. I can call it a force. I can call it a lot of things. And even none of those things describe it because it's so deeply and it's so deep and far greater than any of our definitions of it. I believe human beings don't even have the logical, psychological capacity to define what that is, which is why when they come out and go, no, guys, we've defined it and we've written all the rules and we've got this is what God looks like. Just go down to, St. Paul's Cathedral. It's right there. And you're like, oh, right. St. Paul's Cathedral is basically designed like a grove, like a tree grove with the sun shining through it. Where did they get that shit from? Maybe 100 cults before they ever came on the scene. So, and yet there's no gratitude shown to those previous cults that were all massacred and wiped off the face of the earth by these religious nutbags, right? And so you go, so what? That's that's God? God works through, God wipes out his entire creation that he created because they sinned in his absence or something? And, and just the way the stories are told and interpreted, to me, it's backwards. But when configured correctly and understood, like Kuhn is saying, when you go through the veil of it and you understand that it's disguised duplicity, it's designed duplicity, because they were trying to protect the knowledge, because they knew that if these pearls were thrown at the feet of the average masses back then who were totally traumatized and enslaved mentally, they would destroy it. So they weren't protecting it from some Illuminati or some secret round table. They were protecting it from us, the original guys, right? And nobody wants to swallow that pill because, of course, we are the abused victims of everybody, and we never did any wrong, right? And then, you know, the idea you were saying too about guilt and shame and all that being at the base of it, that's not the intention. That's what was crafted later.
That's
and
right.
what does that do but create the dynamics of an abused victim in a controlling relationship? And to me, that's the wrong form of religion for myself. I can't buy into that. I go for the personal, more undefined, mysterious aspect of it. And then I can read a Bible, and I can read a Quran, and I can read these old, you know, the Tao Te Ching, and I can pull meaning from it that's totally different than everybody that's looking at it in its like isolated chamber of literal interpretation. And that's the thing. Now it's coming from the inside out instead of the outside in. And that's the only thing I'm saying, is that's what's different, is I'm not taking it from external in, I'm going internal out, because I'm actually listening to what the Christ said. He told you where the kingdom of heaven was. And so I took that very literally. And I find it very interesting that that section is not taken literally by the Christians.
Yeah, man. Beautifully said. I even think of this quote by the Christ in the Gospel of Thomas, part of the Apocrypha that was excluded from the secular canon. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will know that you are the sons of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty. You know, it's like,
boom. See, I'm down with that, Christ. I'm down with that teaching. And why was that edited out again?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the other thing. It's like, you know, people talk about the Bible being the truth, but it's like it was put together by people. Like things were left out. How can that be the truth?
And people don't think like Constantine and Martin Luther and these people weren't part of like deep, dark, powerful occult orders. Like Constantine like murdered like 3 members of his own family. This was like the worst guy on planet Earth who concocted the order of the books, etc., etc. But this is the holiest thing.
Yeah. Well, and look at the enterprise they created. They created an enterprise that lasted thousands of years and gained complete dominion over the earth. Like, what a story, what a sales pitch, what a way to do it. And so these are the ones that got behind the gates and corrupted it, and then went around wearing the costume of it. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing. That's what I think. I think that the priesthoods and the priestesshoods were the ones that came in and corrupted the original. And what we have now is simply the leftover remnants of that original canon of knowledge, which was originally our birthright, that came from all different cultures of the world. It's kind of like what Rumi said, the poet Rumi, who was a Sufi, right? That's an esoteric interpretation of Islam, by the way, right? He came out and he was saying truth was like a mirror that fell from the heaven to earth and shattered into 1,000 pieces. And then people came from all parts of the world, grabbed the piece of the mirror and thought they found the truth. What's that poem telling you? Was there a literal mirror falling from the heavens that actually shattered? Or was he using a metaphor to talk about the nature of truth that was divided? And because it was divided, it became lost in the translation. And all we got to do is put that mirror back together and the truth will be revealed. And isn't it funny that he used a mirror as the metaphor? Because when you put all the pieces of that broken sharded mirror, what are you going to do? You're going to look in the mirror. Boom. It's right there in your face.
Yeah, man. I love what you mentioned about your own personal relationship. It doesn't need to be personified. It doesn't need to be defined. Like I have that, and I've felt that my whole life as well. Like I feel that comfort and I feel that support by like a God or by like a force beyond myself. I've recognized it move in my life, and I've recognized as I've moved towards more self-responsibility, more truth, my authentic path, I see that force becomes greater, and I recognize the actions that I take that enhance the quality of that relationship, and the actions that I can make which cut me off from that as well, you know. But it's a very personalist thing. I don't need to outsource that to a book, to a dogma, to whatever it might be. And like, why is that difficult is my question, you know? It's like people are so scared from really building an individual relationship with God that isn't defined by anyone other than themselves and their own experience. But that's also when it's most powerful. Like no one can take away your direct experience. No one can say anything about that.
And being able to accept other people for their own personal experience. Like, you know, I think about growing up in the church and like, you know, the Greek Orthodox divine liturgy. It's beautiful. There's like all the icons everywhere, and the hymns, and there, my mother included. There are women I look around, older Greek women. They're sitting there and there's chanting, and they're like tears in their eyes. There's this deep connection to something, whatever that is. Now, that I didn't have that for me personally, but for them, there was some deeper connection to whatever that thing is, and I'm like, that's amazing for you. Like, I want that for them, especially if they're cool with other people having their experiences and understanding, like, this is my, yes, I was raised this way. Yes, this is my connection to, something beyond myself or even within myself that they can't even explain. And I don't have no problem with religion. I have no problem with people choosing their thing. I have the problem, and I think you said this earlier also, is like when you have to like come to this affront on me where it's like, no. You can't be doing this thing. You can't be personalizing in your way. You need to be believing what I'm believing. And that's where I draw the line. At the end of the day, I'm cool with you doing whatever you want. You want to go build a little cabin in the woods and like do some nature worship? Great. You want to go to your synagogue? Great. But if you don't allow people the freedom to explore this connection to God and what that is on their own, that's where I have a huge issue. I'm not trying to be like, let's censor all religion. Like, how dare you believe in these things? No, just don't come at me like I'm like connected to Satan because I believe something different to you.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. And Joel, you had that was great stuff too. And I would just say that, like, that's your cult of interpretation. Go with God, like enjoy. Yeah. And so here's a good thing to bring up on this regard. What is the religious experience? We have this thing called the religious experience, right? And I've spoken to people personally my entire life, because I just couldn't get enough of thinking about this, that have had the same experience, if you were to boil it down, as like a physical or psychological experience that people have, like, oh, I felt a rush up my spine. I felt my skin tingling. I heard voices in my head. I had visions when I was asleep. I had visions when I was awake. I had impulses. And I talked to these Christians that tell me, God told me last night that this was what was going to happen. Or I spoke to God and God said this. I'm like, what did you do? You fly up in the clouds, sit down with the bearded guy and have like a conversation, mago e mago, when he like told you this and you wrote it down? Or did you get a video of that? Or like, no, you're clearly speaking metaphorically to me about an experience you had where internally, right? You heard voices, all right. Whose voices was it? Like you were saying earlier, your Maximus, I like thinking about where did that thought come from? I don't have an origin for that thought. It just sort of found its way in there. Well, what is thought? What are you doing when you're thinking? What is that? You get into the new science now, and they're talking about light and, the stimulation of these neurons firing in your brain, which is like electricity and all this electrical charge happening in your brain. And then they even map out different types of brain patterns when people are having religious experiences or out-of-body experiences, or people that take DMT, or all the experiments they did with some of these different drugs and psychology, and how it made them see through the veil and they just saw everything as beautiful, and it almost mirrored the near-death experience. So what are we talking about? Where I got a guy from one religion saying he had a religious experience that showed him the face of his God, and then another guy up the road had his religious experience that showed him the face of his God. And then they both tell me that they pray to those gods and those gods actually talk to them. Well, what's the common denominator? Human beings with a psyche having some kind of dialogue with a voice or a feeling that is occurring within them, right? That's the common denominator. They're just choosing to take that experience, we call the religious experience, and interpret it and filter it through the template of the religion and the cultural motifs that they are accustomed to. Great. But they'll never admit that. They'll never go, oh yeah, totally, that's what it is. Like, and I'm cool with it being that. I'm cool with it being my own personal interpretation, maybe mixed with some cultural things of that religious experience. But they're going to tell you, well, that guy that was over there, that was that Buddhist that had a similar experience to the Buddha and interpreted that experience through that lens. Yeah, he's being deceived by the devil, because he didn't interpret it through the proper lens, which should be this Bible or this book over here. And that's where I start to sign out and go, I see what's going on here. I see what's going on. The kingdom of heaven is within, all right, but so is the kingdom of hell. Okay. They both work simultaneously. So you got to watch out for where your understanding is coming from as to what is that experience. We're not demeaning the experience. I actually think it's very legitimate. I've had it myself. I've had it both from when I was a Christian growing up as a teenager to I've had even more powerful ones when I was no longer a literalist Christian, right? And I felt it my entire life, this feeling of a hand on my back or something walking with me or guardian angels or whatever you want to call it. And I love the beautiful art in these churches and in these religions. And I think it's beautiful that they've solarized their deities and in a way and shown the sun and on the nature and all that. But you got to look deeper than just the surface sort of kindergarten Sunday school level that you've been taught about it and realize, oh my God, there's a even bigger view here of this incredible experience. It's just being described through this very particular lens. And that's actually not a bad thing, but it can become a bad thing when you take it the wrong way and then start lording it over other people. And now pretending you're the Jim Jones prophet that is hearing the voice of the divine. And how many times have we seen these charismatic figures, whether they're Keith Raniere, Jim Jones, Walter Applewhite, Anthony Fauci, doesn't matter, rising up to say, I am the Holy One. Follow me. I will lead you out of the darkness. I will bring you to the ninth dimension. I will free you from the evil of this world and the feeling of being trapped in your horrible body. I will free you from that because here's the real. And then you realize, oh my God, it's a death cult. It's a suicide cult. It's a wacky, And so I guess I sit there and I go, well, this is a product of what we started talking about. The evasion of reality, the evasion of the truth, and the replacing of that journey with comforting certainties. And I think that's where we go wrong with it.
Yeah, I remember reading a book many, many years ago, and hopefully I have like the story right, but it was Under the Banner of Heaven by John Krakauer. Did you ever read that book, David? It explores the history of Mormonism and the growth of like the Church of, the Latter-day Saints. But then within that story, it explores fundamentalism, and it's about these two brothers and that they were part of some fundamentalist sect and that they received a direct revelation from God to like murder their brother's wife and their 18-month-old baby. You know what I mean? And so it's
Right.
like, this is where it's just like outrageous and ridiculous. Like, yes, that's, you have the direct connection to God and you're all knowing in that regard.
Anyone can have personal moments of satori or inspiration. Just because you're experiencing something numinal or, supernatural, whatever you want to call it, it does not mean that you're the only messenger of God now because you've experienced something new. It's like we're all capable of that experience. And it's personal. It doesn't give you some kind of authority. It's just so ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joel.
No, I've got some amazing quotes here, which I want to share. Sure. It's from Michael in his Astrotheology book. And he's talking about the incredible original stories and symbols, from the Egyptians that then eventually got watered down. And he says, understanding what occurred to archaic traditions is not difficult. Accounting for the mutilated state of the scriptures is likewise not hard once we understand what was afoot in the ancient world. After all, what occurs when a student in a first grade art class, under instructions from his teacher, attempts to copy a painting by Picasso, Rembrandt, Da Vinci? What happens when a gifted artist tries to emulate the work of a master? The finished renditions will never under any circumstances outdo the original. That is the established fact. The same goes for spiritual sophomores who vainly attempt to reproduce the theologies of master adepts. In short, the travesties we find in the Bible are to be expected. They are in such a form because they were scripted, collated, and published by the agents of morally and spiritually degenerate men whose aim was power and dominion.
Boom. You have to read that book, guys. I actually...
It's the best, man.
I've just been rereading it. There's too, I could just sit there and read the whole book because what's good about it is it's sourced up the yin. Like you can't deny it. It's just right. It's once you see this, you're going to realize you can't stop seeing it. Like you'll go into every church. Like I've been into so many. I actually love going and looking at these old cathedrals and the churches. I think it's just amazing. And I go in there, and when Michael brought up the point, he's like, yeah, those churches were built as a temple to the right brain.
Yeah.
That's why it's so grand. And the temples, they were often crafted after the Druidic natural world, like the natural beliefs that happened prior to this new kind of fundamentalist dogma started to come in and co-opt it. And that's why you see the tree grove symbolism, the sun symbolism, right?
Yeah.
And then you see it all through our nursery rhymes. You see it in all of our literature. And it's interesting how people get really picky and choosy as to what's myth and what isn't. And we were going to talk a little bit about this, is this sort of conundrum with some scholars that are alternative scholars reading this different ways. You have someone like Ralph Ellis that's going to say, well, he's convinced that at least 80% of the Bible is actually historical.
Mm-hmm.
His argument is that it's applied to the wrong era. And when you apply it to the correct era, that one of the duplicitous acts was to ascribe it to an era that it wasn't supposed to be, to hide a different story of these pharaonic lines, these Hyksos pharaonic lines, that's the real story of the movement of the Isis, Ra, El-ites and the whole thing. And he would say, yeah, that's historical, but not in the way that it's understood. And then you have these others like a Manly P. Hall or a Reverend Robert Taylor who are going to say, no, it's the stellar cult. It's the story of the stars just encapsulated in a anthropomorphized metaphorical way. And I remember talking to Ralph about this, and I've literally asked everybody. I asked Jordan Maxwell this when I interviewed him before he passed away. I asked Michael this many times. We've done many shows on this. And what I think it is obviously both. Ralph would agree as well, by the way, because he also talks about astrotheology and everything else and the symbolism. But what I think of it as, just to explain this, because as people research this, they're going to run into this question as to which is it? Well, it's both. And the way you can understand it is to understand how ancient writing worked. And the way to understand that is to just think about how we tell stories today in film or fiction, right? Is you think of let's think of a character like James Bond, okay, just to keep it cool. So you got James Bond, you have Sean Connery James Bond, who those James Bonds were filmed in a particular time. What was it, the 70s or something like that? And so those films are telling the template story of James Bond, the character, and all the things that come with him, right? And it's told on the canvas of the time in which those films came out. So the bad guys in the film will be the bad guys that America was facing or Britain was facing at the time, right?
Yeah.
And then you fast forward to like Daniel Craig James Bond, and all the modern motifs and the bad guys and the wars and the stuff going on in the time that the Daniel Craig James Bond comes out. So same template, same story of the character. Did James Bond actually exist? No, right? Did agents like James Bond exist? Well, possibly, but of course he's blown up into a big cartoon character because obviously spies, most of your work is boring and it's not as exciting as that, okay?
Yeah.
So they tell a story that's got historical aspects woven into it, but the template itself that was superimposed on top of that is not the template of a real spy that actually existed. It's a exaggerated story of a spy generally, and then cast in different eras. And that's why you see the continuation of the story stays about the same, but it's just different timelines and whatever. That's how I see it. That's how you explain it. So you've got the historical Jesuses, right? Of course, of which there is many Jesus. There's a few different Jesuses running around. And then you got the people saying, no, wasn't this guy Jesus? That's a mathematical numerological name. That is 888 or something that has to do with the sun. Yeshua was the guy. He was Yeshua, and he was this, whatever, Ben Yeshua. But there was a few of those guys in different parts of the era. And one of them was this Jesus of Odessa, which is what Ralph is going after, who was actually basically a revolutionary communist trying to unite the Jews against the Roman Empire in a rebellion. And there was the whole story of the Jewish rebellion, which is documented. And then Ralph would say, yeah, there wasn't this guy Moses who went on a mountaintop and spoke to an actual physical burning bush and came down like Charlton Heston with these big commandments. That's actually an older story that comes out of the Egyptian stuff, and it has to do with Akhenaten. So Moses is Akhenaten in his way of looking at it, which was an actual pharaoh in Egypt, an elite dynastic pharaoh that was cast out of Egypt. And that the exodus of the Hyksos is thoroughly documented, whereas the exodus as told in the era of the Old Testament of the Israelites is not historically documented to that degree. So that's what Ralph's argument would be. Now, regardless of that, here's something interesting when it comes to symbolism. If you go into the Old Testament and you start reading about the tribes of Israel, which oddly enough add up to the number 12, which we'll get into, seems to be a recurring number for a reason. So you got these 12 tribes of Israel. The main tribe, the sort of leading tribe, was the tribe of Judah, right? Symbolized by the lion. And the lion has always been the symbol of the sun in Egypt and before because of the mane. It looks like the sun rays, right? So you have the tribe of Israel, and they were known as the children of light, right? And the number of their people, the number that they gave in the Old Testament of the number of these, this tribe of Judah, just so happened to be exactly, when you go and Google, what is the speed of light? It is exactly that number. It is not even one deviation off of that number. That's interesting coincidence, right? And then when you start diving into these coincidences, you'll realize, man, there is definitely a symbolic story that's told. And I'll give another example really quick that I've just been diving into, which is just phenomenal. It's the story of the Holy Trinity. I don't know how much you guys have gotten into this, but this will blow your mind. So I was looking into some Manly Hall and some other esoteric writers on this, and they were telling the story like this. They would say, well, let's just think about it. If we look at the original template, remember I was telling you about the original template? Michael would say it's the stellar cult. That was the stellar tradition was the original from which all religions borrowed. Then it broke into these little mini cults of like the Saturn cult, the sun cult, the lunar cult, and all these other splinter cults. But they all borrowed, those are all stellar attributions. So they all borrowed from the stellar cult. So if we look at that as that's the original, and we can understand why ancient man would do that. They would look up at the sky. It was the grand mystery. It looked magical to them. Like what causes lightning? What causes the movements of planets? You know, these Egyptian priesthoods would like meditate for and study the stars and map stars for thousands of years and document it. And what made them so curious about it was that they believed in correspondence theory. The idea that whatever was happening up in the heavens was actually a map for what was going on inside every human being. And that we were connected. Nature was connected to ancient man in a way that was rejected later by the more Gnostic Christian, these more other religions. But the original were saying, no, there's a connection between everything. And so what's above is below, what's within was without. And this is the sort of hermetic correspondence concept. And so that was the original. Now, when we come up to this idea in Christianity of a holy trinity, why is Christianity not unique with that? Why are there many, like Hinduism? You've got Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. You've got the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost. What's with this number 3 now? We've got the number 12. We've got the number 3. We've got the speed of light. But the number 3 with the Trinity is interesting because, so they would say, well, that's them mapping the sun. So the sun was the most high God in the sky, right? We saw, Jehovah and all these gods are the most high. Well, because that is the sun. Like they looked at it as that's the symbol, the best symbol we have, the best proof we have is what we're seeing in the heavens every single day. And why did we ascribe all the God attributes to what the sun actually does every single day, right? So here's the example, the division of 12. We'll start with that. The ancient Egyptians looked at it as the sun taking 12 steps across the sky until it reached the stage where it went away into the underworld and took 12 steps in through the underworld and then came back up, right? That gave us, so in Egypt, the sun god was Horus, right? So Horus took 12 steps across the sky. Horus, and you look at how we spell hours, Horus, hours. So 12 Horuses, the 12 hours of the day and the 12 hours of night, just to give you one example. You also have 12 months in the year and all these divisions. It's all based on the sun cycle, right? Now we get into the Trinity. Well, this is interesting because why do so many of these religions, including Christianity, have this Trinity God? How is it a monotheism? One God, but it's 3. That's interesting. It's always been a bit of a debate in theology. Well, here we solve it right now. The reason why is because the Most High God has 3 main phases throughout those 12 steps. So of the 12, there's 3 main ones. You have sunrise, You have the Most High, 12 noon, and then you have sunset, the three main phases. So this is the Trinity. The Father of the Trinity. So if we go Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Son, interesting word. So Father is the sunrise, and this is why they ascribe the color blue to God the Father. God the Father is ascribed the color blue. The reason is because as the sun rises up in the morning, and I watch it as much as I can in this beautiful place that I live, is that you see, if it's a nice clear day, you see the really crisp blue of the morning sun as it comes up around the sun. It wraps the sun in this really nice blue. And that's because it's sitting low, right? As it comes over the horizon. Then it reaches up, it goes up those other steps, and it reaches the Most High, where it's the brightest. It's coming straight down. Even those that are navigators will look to see what the position of the sun relative to the central point of the high noon, and then they'll know what time it is and when the sun's going to set, right? So you got the Most High, that's the sun, that's Jesus, that's the light of glory. That's why he's the superstar. He's the one that gets all the attention. He's the beautiful shining one. He's got halos and sun rays galore in every single photograph that's ever existed of depictions of the Son of God, who was the light of the world. Well, what is the light of the world? It's the bloody sun. And so then you got that. And then you go down to sunset. That's the Holy Spirit. And I believe it's purple, the color. Oh yeah. So yellow would be the Christ. Purple would be the Holy Spirit. And so you've got, because that's the sunset.
Sun right? Sets as he sets into darkness, right?
He sets into darkness, and there's set in the Egyptian ideology, right?
Yeah.
So three phases of the same God, talking about the sun. That was ancient man's way of, in my opinion, of looking at the mystery of nature and saying, well, this must be God, because God gives us eternal life. The sun has eternal life. This is the other thing in Christianity. You see this eternal life, because the sun dies and then is resurrected again on just a 24-hour cycle. And then there's the greater cycle of the seasons, of how the seasons actually change based on the movement of the sun. And this is why you have, Christmas on December 25th, the celebration of Mithras' birth on December 25th, and all that, because of having to do with the way the sun rises. So that they look at that and they go, this must be how God operates. And then they moved it to the next phase of saying, well, that sun that's navigating the sky and having all those numerical principles and all of that, there's a sun within you. There's an inner sun. So they took everything external in the heavens and they applied it within. And so you got, the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 disciples, the 12 houses of Israel, on and on we go, the 12 steps across the sky. It's all symbolic. And then they'll say, well, your body is divided into 12 divisions. You got the feet. Pisces is the feet. Capricorn is the knees. Go up to the divisions. Then you up at the head. That's Aries and Taurus. And it's mirroring what's going on in the heavens, right? And so as above, so below. And that was how they looked at it. And then the sun, the activation of the sun and the way to speak to the divine is told through the cerebral spinal fluid as it goes through the journey up the 33 vertebrae of your spinal cord, because you have 33 vertebrae. And this is why Jesus dies at the age of 33, is because he's crucified. Once that, so if the movement of that cerebral spinal fluid is correspondent to the moon and the sun and their cycles, because it is, then when it reaches the pinnacle, it fills up and replenishes this pool in your brain where you have your neocortex and you have the pineal and the pituitary glands, which need to be replenished with this oil and this liquid that your body produces. This is the oil, the Christed one. This is why in Egypt, they would take the crocodile fat and they would put it on your forehead. This is why in India, they put the dot on the forehead. This is why the pharaohs put the serpent on the forehead. Nothing evil about it. It just was the symbol of wisdom. This is why in Christianity, they cross themselves from the forehead to the belly button, to the heart, to the right. The cross symbolism itself has to do with the sun and the light, because that was what was seen when you would see the sun coming up. They've even gone and done holographic imagery of photons and different cells and whatnot. And when you take the holographic image of a photon, it makes a symbol of a cross, oddly enough. And of course, Christianity is the religion of light and everything. So you can take this in a way that's actually more real and more personal to you, rather than, oh, it's just a story of some guy who lived thousands of years ago that came to save the world. Well, no, this is the story of the sun, and it's saving the world every day. Jesus is returning every morning, and then he's going to battle the demons of the underworld every night, and then he comes right back up. And if he never came back up, we would not have eternal life anymore. So because the sun has eternal life, they thought, well, then the Christ, if we believe in that, can give us eternal life, because our soul, which is the same word as the sun, Sol, our soul has the same eternal life as the light of the sun. And that is the story they're really trying to tell you in the Bible. It's a correspondence theory mapped on nature, told through Shakespearean play. And for some reason, that is the most controversial, impossible explanation. Yet to me, it makes perfect sense. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
And like how
Blasphemy, David.
I know.
How empowering is that, though?
I know.
To know that you are a microcosm of the universe, and to recognize that story and that cosmology exists within you. All the stars out there also present as inner treasures within me, which I can call upon and access, and I get to play that story out as well. I've got this amazing quote here from Charles Francis Dupuis in his Origin of Worship. So all the solar deities, he says, have a common history, and this history is summarized as follows. The god is born about December 25th, without sexual intercourse, for the sun entering the winter solstice emerges in the sign of Virgo, the heavenly virgin. His mother remains ever virgin, since the rays of the sun passing through the zodiacal sign leave it intact. His infancy is begirt with dangers, because the newborn sun is feeble in the midst of the winter's fogs and mists, which threaten to devour him. His life is one of toil and peril, culminating at the spring equinox in a final struggle with the powers of darkness. At that period, the day and night are equal, and both fight for the mastery. Though the night veil the urn, and he seems dead. Though he has descended out of sight below the earth, yet he rises again triumphant. And he rises in the sign of the Lamb, Aries, and is thus the Lamb of God, carrying away the darkness and depth of the death of the winter months. Henceforth he triumphs, growing ever stronger and more brilliant. He ascends into the zenith, and there he glows on the right hand of God, himself God, the very substance of the Father, the brightness of his glory, and the express image of his person, upholding all things by his life-giving power.
That just sums it. That was well done. I haven't read that book. I got to read. I've read so many like it, but that's another great one. And you know, what's funny with this is, like, have you ever gone into nursery rhymes? Okay, we got to do a show one time. I've got to put this together much better, but like, there's so many nursery rhymes that we have in Western culture, right? That if I were to tell the average religious person, the literalist person, I would say, all right, are nursery rhymes real? They would say, well, no, those are just like nursery rhymes. They're just like myths. They're stories, or we gain some insight from them. Okay, so let's start with Jack and Jill.
Mm-hmm. I was just about to look
Michael
that
did this once, and I'll just quickly redo it because it's so awesome. So Jack and Jill run up the hill to fetch a pail of water. And then Jack falls down and breaks his crown, and Jill comes tumbling after. Remember that shit? I grew up with that one. And I went, oh, that's a nice little story. It doesn't make any damn sense, but it's a nice story. So then I'll go, okay, what are we talking about here? Well, Jack and Jill are the sun and the moon. What if we look at it like that? And this is how you would tell these illiterate people that are some more right-brained. This is how you tell the story. You go, hey, Jack and Jill go up the hill. Well, what's the hill? Is the stellar arch. They go up the hill of the sky, right? They go up halfway. They go up to fetch a pail of water to Aquarius, the water bearer, right?
Yeah.
They go up to fetch a pail of water. Then Jack, who's the sun, he's playing the role of the sun in this play. Jack falls down and breaks his crown. Well, that's them saying Jack goes down from the high noon point, down the arch, over the horizon. Jack falls down and breaks his crown. He loses his sun rays. He doesn't have his sun rays anymore. And now we're in darkness. But Jill comes tumbling after. That's the moon. Now the moon comes out, right? Yeah. And even in the daytime, you can see the moon at certain times if the atmosphere is clear, right? So Jack and Jill go up the hill together, they fall down, and they follow each other. So that's just one little tiny example of which we could go into the story of trolls under bridges and all these other nursery rhymes, and we could decode it through using this astrotheology, really, and realize that the greatest drama that was in front of ancient man was not IMAX productions done by Hollywood. The real Hollywood was ancient druids and priests and seers and astronomers looking up at the most fascinating thing that ancient man would have looked at, because it was all he had to look at to go, what in the hell is all that up there? And they would create stories around it to keep the memory of the movements of these cycles of the luminaries, right? And then they would do it to bring meaning to life. That was the point. The point of Jack and Jill is not whether Jack and Jill actually existed as physical people, that we have to go around and prove that, right? It doesn't matter if they existed as physical people. What matters is they're telling you the story of the greatest mystery and the greatest expression of nature that's not just happening above you, it's also happening within you, if you were to take the correspondence theory on board. That's the real meaning behind the story, and it brings heaven to earth. It connects God with man. It gives order out of chaos. It gives meaning where there's no other meaning. That's what it is. So these stories, the reason we love them, the reason we go watch plays and operas and movies and we read these books and we try to think about them, is because they give us meaning in all this life. Otherwise, there is no meaning. So that's why they'll say, well, you're a lost soul if you don't accept the Holy Writ, because you're running around thinking this is all meaningless. You're not connected to the real story of what's going on within you. That would have been the real way to be saved, right? But they've taken that to the next level to say, if you don't believe Jack and Jill actually existed in this time and place, and you have to pray to them every night, then you're a heretic, right?
Jack is the truth. Jack is the truth. Lean on Jack's understanding. Do not lean on thine own will.
That's it. So if you want, you could say, they say, what would Jesus do? What would Jack do? Give it a name, anything you want. It doesn't matter. It's telling you the same thing. And that's why I always tell these well-meaning people, I just don't need that. I don't have a need for that because I feel secure within, and I don't have this need for external saviors and historical figures. If there was someone like Jesus as described, who was a brilliant sage, there's also an argument that could be made that he studied in Egypt in some of these temples. And there's even people that say, no, he went to India and he studied there. And he basically brought this sort of Oriental concept of as above, so below to a people that never heard of that before. And therefore he was worshipped as a hero. And he was a great man that visited the earth, and he was an enlightened being. And we've got the record of it in sort of a tattered form. Hey, I'm cool with that too. But in the end, it's still missing the point to go, that's where it all rests. Because he did tell you that the kingdom of heaven is within you, and everything I can do, you can do, and greater, which is a hint to say, you are supposed to become Christ-like. You are supposed to become this. I'm supposed to be the imago that you project upon. Because here's another factor we have to bring into religious study. Humans naturally psychologically project. This is what we do. And we actually do it because it's part of the way that we develop empathy and how we have empathy with nature, a connection to nature and to each other. It's how we form relationship. When people first meet you, what do they want to know? What do you do for a living? They start with all the boring shit. What do you do for a living? Are you married? You got any kids? And then we start getting into the weeds because they're trying to project onto you a little bit. They're trying to get an idea of where you're at. So we do that in terms of forming relationships. So when people say, I need to have a relationship with God, I need to have a relationship with something holy, that's them saying, I need to psychologically project outside of myself to something that's greater than me, right? Because that's symbolically what we're doing with nature. We look at it as, well, I'm a part of nature, but it's also out of my control. It's bigger than just me, but yet I'm a part of it. So we're forming a relationship with it. So we project outwards. This can be a positive thing in a healthy psyche, but it can be a negative thing in terms of, say, I don't know, a manipulative, abusive relationship where someone is projecting all of their fears and their shadow and their dark side onto you, and they're not taking personal responsibility, and now you're the one to blame for everything. That's a negative form of that. And so I'm thinking that this dogmatized, fundamentalist type of religion is that. it's an abusive relationship with yourself, because you're not being honest in this take on the fact that you are psychologically projecting your powers and all of that kingdom of heaven within you. You're projecting that onto a bunch of people that, whether they existed or not, is really irrelevant. The whole point was to derive the meaning from their existence and the meaning from the stories told about them, to bring it back within the self again, because that's where the kingdom lives, right? So, everything they're telling you about the rapture and Jesus returning and all of that, I could make the argument that these solar flares that were hitting the planet and causing the most beautiful display of light we've ever seen in a long time, you could say, hey man, the Christ has returned. Because what does that do? It's charging, there's charged particles hitting our magnetosphere. And I feel like a lot of people felt like they were lifted up by this activity of the sun. Because I think that what's going on in nature has a lot more correspondence with our ability to project and our psyche than we know. And that's why we get it wrong. And we get lost looking at the finger pointing to the moon. And then we miss all the heavenly glory externally and, more importantly, internally.
Yeah.
Well said, bro.
Nah, man, it's all hop.
Yeah.
It's all hard. You guys, I'm not mad at the conspiracy movement now. You guys have lost your goddamn minds.
I can't.
I'm sorry. It's just gone insane.
I mean, it's like immediately once a new story or a new event comes out, there's just the initial, like, it's a conspiracy and this is what it is.
Oh, it's just,
but again, it goes back to what we said, and we've been saying this whole time: certainty and uncertainty.
There you go.
Pair of opposites.
Yeah. And
how does each individual dance with those two within themselves? And for most people, it's like, no, this is the reason for it. It's conspiracy. The evil ones are doing it.
Yeah. Everything's of the devil. Here's a point to bring up to that, your point, Erasmus. This is huge. Okay. And I learned this from doing Unslaved with Michael for so many years, and it blew me away. And I've never remembered this. You can't take consciousness off the table, right? This is something we've always said.
Yep.
And when you realize what you're just saying there, that there's a reason people want to avoid the beauty of nature around them and within them. And it has to do, this is the theory, with this past shock, this past trauma that I believe is encoded in our phylogenetic memory of our species, of times where nature betrayed us. And that's just the way it felt. Like, imagine, some strife between your parents as a kid. You might look at that as your parents betraying you as a kid, and then you might develop some complexes around that. So if, let's say, nature was once worshipped and venerated and respected and seen, everything was seen as a friend, and then suddenly there's massive volcanoes and there's possibly, like meteors hitting the planet and causing massive, deluge and floods and all the records are filled with this stuff. And so then it looks like a betrayal. It looks like the gods have cursed man. And that's the recording of the fall of man. The fall of man is not just a moral decline that happened because man decided to be evil one day. The moral, quote unquote, decline happened as a result of the shock of these traumatic events that it was so traumatic that it split the psyche in two. It split the hemispheres. It caused this sort of schizophrenic reaction. And so this is the idea that those major traumas, compounded by the other traumas of history, all the wars, the genocides, the invasions, compounded by the traumas of your own personal life in this life, have led most humans to have what's called an antipathy to nature, meaning a fear of nature. And especially with this whole modern civilization where we got electricity and we can hide in our domiciles from the natural world, and we see ourselves as the dominant species on the planet, etc. When you start to say, hey, forget all your fears, just go look out at those beautiful stars. Well, that, for you and I, that's amazing. Oh, look at the mystery. It's incredible, And then, but to other people, that really strikes a chord of deep-seated anxiety and fear.
Yeah.
And I think when you're saying solar flares, and I'm saying, I was one of the only ones out there on social media saying, hey, I think this is a beautiful thing. I think these solar flares are gonna be amazing. I wasn't like Alex Jones, who's like, the government is doing drills and they're gonna fucking lose all of our power. And I think that the reason people go, oh no, it's some conspiracy, or there's something evil going on, or it's gonna just hurt the planet, is because that harkens back to this feeling of, I'm afraid of that natural world. It's beyond my control or explanation. So it's easier to ascribe it to some kind of evil or fallen state.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to think about too, even in regards to the conversation around geoengineering. Like, it makes you wonder if, like, fucking with the weather to whatever degree, again, obviously this is a conspiracy for many, like, is getting people to kind of get tapped back into that primal trauma, that primal fear to be like, oh, I don't want to live out in nature. Put me in the fucking 15-minute cities,
Yeah.
even more so, I don't know. It's just interesting to think about.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, David. And I also think there's another piece, which is, again, I see it hermetically. It's like these people, they're not seeing the beauty within. And so they're unable to see the beauty without. Right? It's a self-esteem thing too. And it reminds me of the Emerson quote where he says, people do not seem to realize that their opinion of the world is also a confession of their character.
Oh.
Right? Or even Anai Nin, she says, we do not see the world as it is, but as we are.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's like anything great, anything beautiful, anything real, true godliness is going to be rejected, right?
Yeah.
True beauty, we can't stand it. We can't seem to hold it for the most part. And we need to tarnish it immediately. And to me, this speaks of volumes to the level of consciousness that we have on this planet, right? It's like, I think to the person who's truly interested in self-esteem, in raising their consciousness, like they see the meaning, they see the richness, they see the beauty, they see the interconnectedness, they see the reality that they're genuinely supported at all times, right? But for those with low self-esteem, for those who have bought the lie and who have such a disdain of self-responsibility and self-antagonism within themselves, the beauty is impossible to see.
Oh my God. That's incredibly insightful, Joel. That takes it to the next level, doesn't it? Because you're spot on. It actually goes well with what we were talking about because, and I know this is a big theme of your show, and I'm so glad it is because you know how rare it is to tune into shows that even touch on this stuff. It's like it doesn't exist. So keep going. And the biggest insight, this is the secret that it's going to sound harsh, but it's fucking true, man. Don't study the religion. Study the adherents.
Mm-hmm.
Don't look at the cult leaders, look at the followers, and everything will be revealed to you. What kind of people are the ones knocking on your door to recruit you into this way of seeing, this externalized way of seeing? Which kind of people are needing this to be the truth? When does religion become suddenly important to people? When they're afraid, right? Well, I'm sorry, fear leads to the dark side, not the light side, okay? Especially for people that are in that traumatized, self-hating state.
Yeah.
And so, and the reason I brought up the nature thing, the antipathy to nature, is because if we know that we are also a part of that natural world, there's a feeling unconsciously that we are also fallen as nature is fallen, or that we are also cursed and evil as nature is. And this comes from those ancient Gnostic and Christian principles. It's woven right into it. Christians would never admit that they come from a Gnostic ideology of earth being a cage of the soul, a fallen world, and that the body of the human is the fallen state. Whereas before, the Egyptians and these other previous cultures, they looked at the body as like a precious gift, right? Because it was something used to navigate, the soul energy could navigate the creative level of reality in the physical body. So you are not to degrade the body, which so many religious systems do. I mean, look at Islam with their just covering women up top to bottom and this whole thing of standing there hacking themselves with knives in the street. Like, where did that shit come from? And then it doesn't get any better in Christianity with the history of them whipping themselves for all their sins and whipping others and boiling people in oil and genociding entire peoples, right? So that is, it's a combination of a hatred and a fear of nature that has coupled with a hatred and fear of your body, which then becomes your identity. And look at how on the other side of that, look at the damage that's caused. Look, we live in a time of a big identity crisis, don't we? Where people don't know what they are and they're just making shit up as they go now, and everything's relative and you can be whatever you want. And you can basically be like an anime character that can change its guise every single day. What's that but the evasion of reality on steroids?
Yeah.
And I was doing a show. This is reminding me of something. we were talking about, and this is from Erich Fromm, and he was talking about this exact, he's got a whole thing about the betrayal of the self, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was either him or Arno Gruen. Maybe it was Arno Gruen that did Betrayal of the Self. But they both talk about this idea of, there was this idea of breaking away from selfhood, and this idea of creating yourself and having that self-esteem that you're talking about. And then Nathaniel Branden, Ayn Rand, they get in there as well and talk about this, about the mystics of spirit that Rand talks about. These are your priesthoods, right? And so we have to think about this. Is the average person stuck in this religious dogmatic mindset actually stuck in a self-hating antipathy to nature mindset that they have falsely just interpreted as, ooh, that's a religious experience because I'm now free? What are you saved from now? You're saved not from evil and the wiles of the devil that you've imagined. You're saved from that hatred and that fear and that anxiety that's possessed within you. That's where it's coming from. And that's why they're desperate for you to come and put that disguise on as well. And if you don't, it's kind of like that guy at the bar that wants to keep drinking and you're like, no, I'm good. But he's trying to force you to drink with him because it justifies him continuing to go over the deep end, right? Yeah. It's the same thing. We want company in misery.
Yeah.
And that's what I see it as. And that's why it's collectivistic. That's my issue as well, is that if my parents did this, we'd go from one church to the other and they would leave after a while because they didn't like how they were getting pigeonholed into very particular interpretations and rituals and stuff. And so we'd go to another church and then it would happen again. And I just started going, this is futile. Why don't you guys just do your own church? And my parents were like, well, no, we can't do that. We're told we have to. And I'm like, well, for me, if people were to say, Dave, where's your church? I got a beautiful little spot right across the street with beautiful view of the water and the trees and the mountains. And I go there and I talk to God, all right.
Yeah.
But I don't need all that other claptrap and ritual and waving crosses around in order to do it. And I don't need a bunch of people crowding up my mojo. I need it to be one-on-one, personal relationship. And that to me is where I've heard that voice of God or spirit the clearest. I feel like when I'm around a whole bunch of people yelling and singing and chanting and judging and trying to read stuff, and it just, to me, that crowded the noise. I never heard the voice of God there. I heard it when I was alone in the woods and staring up at the sky. That's when I've heard that voice the clearest. And so, yeah, just an incredible point you brought up, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, man. Me too, man. Me too. And for me, it's even loudest when most people are asleep. You know, when literally when most minds are asleep and the air isn't blocked with all these thoughts, etc. in the midst of the morning or in the, you know, at night, it's like, that's when the connection even feels stronger for me. Like there's more solitude with that. It's an interesting observation. And it's like this self-hatred is generational. It's passed down. And I want to read another quote from Michael in Astrotheology, where he says, unlike esoteric precepts, the exoteric version concocted by the propagandists ceased to address the complexities of man's inner life. It was not a philosophy for the Platos and Aristotles of the world. It was born from the minds of men who feared and despised intellectual development. Nature was not to be contemplated, but abhorred. The body was not the temple of God, but the prison of the soul. Women were not equal to men, but their slaves and seducers. Indulging the senses eventually led to permanent residence in the fires of hell. The vile works of the forgers and propagandists portrayed men as consummate sinners estranged on a spiritless planet where the devil sat about luring souls to perdition. You know, and this is the real religion. This is the real religion that the masses have bought into. It's this fallen world, spiritless place, devoid of meaning, full of chaos, full of randomness, full of disconnection, full of self-hatred, self-loathing, so avoidant of productivity, irrationality, reason, right-brained imagination, right? And that is the cult. This is the overarching cult of all cults, in my opinion. And it's why you're so easily able to be manipulated, because you have no self-esteem, because this is the cult of whose door you entered into.
And that's key because, wow, that's powerful. And also who benefits from that condition.
Exactly.
Look at the state of the world. This is why people are like, yeah, let the world burn. Let it fall. It's evil. Let my body burn. It's evil. But we're going to be all dancing and singing in heaven, aren't we, at the end? So it's not about this life. Let's get them focused on the afterlife and the spiritual world and out there. And that way we can gain dominion and control right here. And that's why, to me, that's the negative side of it. When the truth of the same exact stories were supposed to inspire the opposite. That would be Alvin Boyd Kuhn's argument. He's like, the original intention was not to get you in that mode you're describing, Joel. It was to get you completely the opposite way around. But because of the garbled translations that Tessarian is pointing out there, because of the misinterpretations, because of the development, the stunted growth in humanity, because of these traumas, and yes, because of that hidden hand of control trying to keep us down, right? This is why we're still in a fallen state. It doesn't mean it's the condition of our world. It doesn't mean it's the only condition that this planet and this world and that humanity can exist in. We can create heaven on earth, but we have to create heaven within first. So if you got a bunch of people, tortured souls, confused souls running around that are actually living in an internal hell, a state of internal hell, you wonder why. What's that statement from Hamlet when he's like, hell is empty, all the devils are here. That's why. But that doesn't mean that's our destiny. That's not predetermined. That's just part of the game. And that's just the part of the game that we're at. And the good news is, the real good news of the Christ, of the Buddha, of these teachings is that you can save yourself anytime you want from that by simply going within and having that inner dialogue and activating that pineal gland, which gives you the Wi-Fi connection to the Creator. And you can go to nature and learn all the lessons right there. And you will discover that you can live in an eternal state of heaven, even when the world around you is living in a state of hell.
Yeah, man, exactly. And you will literally bring heaven to earth and create heaven around you. Watch how your friendships change. Watch how your circumstances change. Watch how what you do for money shifts. Everything becomes more heavenly when you reclaim the sacredness, when you build your self-esteem, when you raise your level of consciousness. But when you're living in this mode and you're seeing everything as dark, evil, and tarnished, then look at the world around you. Look at the kind of toxic relationships you have, the gaslighting, the narcissism, the ceilings on your potential that exist. So like heaven, we really do create reality in our image, right? Self-esteem is the reputation you have with yourself. As you know yourself, as you love yourself on a deeper level, I've seen it firsthand. My experiential reality changes. My friendships become deeper. I've got more love for my family, for what I do, for my environment shifts, all of it. And this is true reality creation, true manifestation, in my opinion, is that we do create heaven when we really do the work to sincerely change our inner world.
That's powerful, man. Erasmus, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree, man. I think what you guys were saying, I'm on the same page. So, I mean, change starts within.
Yeah.
Self-knowledge is where it has to be at. You know, you can't shy away from your inner world.
No, and it's just so many proofs of this. Like in my life, if I were to think, we were just talking about, I just reopened a new dojo in my community, and there's a good example. When I opened my first, so my wife and I have opened 4 dojos together since like 2008. We've had 4 different renditions of this project of owning and operating a martial arts studio. And the first one, we made boatloads of mistakes and put too much money into it, did a lot of things wrong, were invested with the wrong people. And, you know, we did well considering, but it wasn't as successful as it could have been, not because I could sit here and point blame at all these different factors and people, but simply because of the condition that I was in, the place I was at. And then the next one got a little better and then a little better. And now finally, it's amazing. Every single person that has walked into this new space has commented on the energy of the place. Mm-hmm. And I was at a place where I put so much love and energy, and I walked the property line many times, just talking to it, talking to the place, talking to the intention of the place, talking to myself, trying to activate parts of me to say, I'm making a solemn vow to become the best martial artist I can, the best person I can, the best coach I can. My job here is to perform a function to help give the gift that was given to me by my mentors in this art to these young kids, to these people in my community who are broken and who are trying to find themselves, and to give them an outlet for that and not make it a cult and not make it a dogma, but to explore the process of freedom in movement in the body, to do the somatic study. Like, this was my intention. And every nail I hammered in and every brush of paint and everything I had to do in there that was hard, I did it with joy in my heart. I didn't do it with this feeling of like entitlement or, man, I wish some other guys were doing this work right now. It's beneath me. Like, none of this stuff. It was just pure love. And the energy is paying off. And you know what? We're lined up around the block. Like, we're going to sell out like within a month already. And we've already got a bigger space. And it's literally exactly what you're saying, Joel. When your condition is right, you attract the right people. I also attracted the right people that helped me finish the project. There were parts of the project construction wise that I didn't know how to do, but the right people came at the right moment, and the energy came together and it worked out. And that synchronicity that Jung would have called it happens when you are in that harmonic state, which we call the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. And when you're working from there, now you are working with those, you are performing miracles, what they call miracles in your life. Yeah. Because without that energy upgrade, without that application of your consciousness, you wouldn't be able to achieve that vibration. And that vibration is what causes the attraction and the success that comes with it. And so these principles are there. They're telling you in these ancient stories, they're passing this knowledge down, but it's been filtered, it's been garbled, it's been misunderstood. People's attention has been misdirected, as always. And yet we have the solution sitting right in front of us the whole time. We have the Christ returning right now. We have the kingdom of heaven being manifested right now. This awakening process is happening, but we have to watch our naivety and the fact that there's a lot of soothsayers out there trying to whisper you away from that organic, authentic journey that your soul is begging you to embark on. So don't listen to those people around you that are distracting you from that. That path is the narrow path, all right. And it's not the popular path. And so when I see religions that have billions of followers, I'm running the other direction. I'm sorry, because that's not the narrow path. That's the wide path that has light shining all over the bloody place. I mean, and to me, that's not looking authentic. That's a trap.
I mean, their very own Bible says, you know, the wider gate leads to destruction, right? The narrow path leads to life.
Yeah. And there's an old joke that goes, you know, there's a reason the Christ isn't wanting to return, and it's because he's terrified of Christians. And I know that sounds really controversial, but it's kind of true. When you go to a lot of these churches, you know, when I would go to these churches growing up, we'd often go to these like potlucks and houses after, and I met some wonderful people. I've met some of the best people I've ever met. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. I have a lot of amazing Christian friends, and they know where I stand, and we're totally cool. And I love them. But I also met a boatload of inauthentic, pretend fake people that were just playing a role, pretending to be spiritual, pretending to have the truth, pretending to be on that correct side. And they're all on drugs, and they're all, beating their kids and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, like that's so disappointing. And I started to realize there's a difference between the inauthentic version and the genuine version. And the genuine version is manifest in those people that actually embody the teachings, and they actually have a personal connection to that spirit. And they're not just looking at it in that very limited lens. And you can totally see the difference. So don't just look at the specially crafted sales pitch of what it is. Look at the fine print, look at the adherence, look at the proof in the pudding, look at the fruit, make your decision from there, because that's really where the truth is, isn't it? It's right in front of you. It's the proof in the pudding. Yeah. It's right there. And you never need to doubt that. And if you can look and see the certainty there, then you'll learn how to have more certainty in your own judgment and decision-making. And that leads to that self-esteem. And then that leads to that activation of that inner kingdom.
Yeah.
Well said. David.
That's it right there.
Thank you so much, man. Every single conversation with you, I enjoy kind of kicking back and just listening. You do your thing, man. Just like what a gift you are to the world, man. And I can only imagine like your students that get to spend intimate time with you, you know, to where you pass along these truisms and this philosophy and your knowledge, man. Like I just
priceless.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
definitely
thanks, brother.
priceless, man. And thanks for sharing your time with us as always. Like it's we really appreciate it. Our audience appreciates it. And I mean, whatever. I say it every single time. I just have respect for you. You're
Oh,
a stand up human. And I want to highlight something I said to Joel before you came on. The thing I really love about you is that you have this mind that is active. And I think this is why we relate to you and connect with you, that you just you can come across material and knowledge and not identify with it. Like not identify with it that it's like, no, this is the thing. And I think it's so important when you're on this path of doing research and you're on this introspective journey, or you're looking into things. Like it's like you can't just like read one book and go, now it's the truth, and then read another book. No, this is the truth. Like you have to take it all in and have this space to really fall in love with this process and be curious about it. And so I just love how you are, man, with the work that you do. And it's inspiring, and it's something that I try to live by as best as I can also. And check myself when I feel like I'm like so certain about
mm,
something and there's this energy behind it, like, no, I'm right, you're all wrong. And I'm like, okay, just there may be truth to that on some level, and let's chill.
yeah.
Let's tap into that humility, where I think humility is important to realize, wow, the amount of knowledge, the amount of wisdom, the amount of books that exists out there. And for me to think, because I identify as a certain religion where I read one single book, that I somehow have all the answers. And then now I'm in charge of telling everyone that I have the answers and that you need to have all the answers. Like I have all the answers. Like that just blows my mind. Like stay humble, people. Like dance with the vastness of your mind and all that exists, and be curious and fall in love with the process of learning and exploring. And I feel like it's such a it's a piece of the puzzle that I just gets lost very often.
Oh, thanks, man. That means a lot. And I feel the same way about you guys. You guys are just shining lights on this channel, doing brave explorations, tackling tough subjects, trying to find different angles, and staying true to the path. And even though we might not always know the full truth and always have it, staying true to the commitment of being as close to it as you can, and staying true to it and staying on the path. That's the key. And you finished with something really nice there, Erasmus, which is curiosity. And this is my appeal to people. If you caught anything from this interview, just stay curious. Don't
Yeah.
let the world and all these opinions and all these things, or even anything I said, kill your curiosity. Keep your curiosity alive. It's your superpower. It's what drives you. It's what motivates you to get up and go explore this great mystery and make it yours. Don't make it mine. I gave you my take. That's my take. I don't want it to. And the thing is I'm not. I have the opposite of wanting to recruit everybody. I'm like, get out of here. That's my shit. You got to go do your own thing.
Same here, man.
I work so hard to come to my own conclusions on all these subjects we talk about that I don't want anybody to be on. That's my personal thing. So you guys have yours, I got mine, and we can come together and meet and agree to disagree on certain things and then sing in harmony on others. And that's a beautiful thing. It's like jujitsu. You have some guy comes in with a different style, or he's a wrestler, or he's this kickboxer or that kid. And I'm like, yeah, you're all welcome here. I'm not here to turn you into me. I'm not here to have a script for you to follow. I'm here to say, let's meet the minds. Let's make this an experimental lab where we can all grow together and share and develop and make it true and make it real. And as long as it's effective, as long as it's provable, that's what we're here to do. And I think it's the same with these intellectual pursuits. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's such a breath of fresh air to speak to guys like you who are totally on that level. And so hats off to you. I always love talking to you boys, and we can do this anytime.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to add something to what you said about the curiosity. It's like, sure, there's curiosity in the external world. I want to invite people to, as you go throughout your life, as you listen to a conversation like this or another podcast or pick up a book, be curious to your reactions. Like, why is it that you watch a podcast with David and he says one thing and it just triggers something within you, or you're on social media and something triggers in you? Like, can you be curious before you want to jump into this self-righteous judgment about the person that's challenging you in some way? And I think this goes back to this whole kingdom of heaven within, this inner work that needs to be done. Like, how curious can you be about why you do the things you do, why you think the things you think, why you react the way you react? Like, it's been part of my journey. Like, that's like gold for me. Like, why is it that person, the way they are, the way they look, the way they are speaking, the things that they're sharing, what is it in me that is being so like triggered, And so, curiosity, like externally, internally, like make that like a mantra, be open to it, tackle like, like grapple with great ideas. Man, it's
I
so
like that.
cool
Grapple with great ideas. That's a good.
Yeah,
That's a good
like
one.
it's such a great. It's so cool being alive. You know, like this gift of life. You know, it's amazing. Anyways,
Yeah, man. I got
love
one
it.
more note on curiosity. You know, like
Sure.
to Jung, curiosity was your intuition. Like the things that you're curious about is what you're intuitively being pulled towards. And I think about this in the whole context of heaven on earth. Like you can create this by honing your curiosity and by being intuitive. Like I think about my own life. In 2020, I was driving to my construction job, listening to an Unslaved episode with Erasmus, Sophie, David, and Michael. I was curious. I reached out to Erasmus, right? And then we had our conversation. Everything is what it is up until that point. Now I'm sitting here with David, Michael, Sophie, and Erasmus as my colleagues. And through that curiosity and through that intuition, I've created my personal heaven on earth, right? As a result of all that. And I think that is the whisper of God. That's what it is more than anything else. And so pay attention, people. That's all I got to say.
Oh,
Amen.
beautiful, beautiful. Guys, like I'm always leaving with goosebumps and teary eyes. Like, what the hell are you doing to me?
Yeah.
This is great.
I hear
That
you,
was
man.
awesome. I hope people got value out of it. And guess what? Here's the final bit. You don't have to agree.
Yeah.
You're free to do whatever the hell you want. You're free to explore this and think about it your own way. I invite you to do it and make it personal. That inner voice of God is trying to speak to you, not the masses, you. And this is the issue that I think will change your entire perspective. So I hope we added some value to everybody today. Go explore these different ideas. Take notes of the names we were bringing up. Some of these are some of the greatest writers and thinkers on these subjects. Go and read up on those books, and they will be a great reference for you to start thinking in ways that maybe you haven't thought about this before. And I invite you to embark on that journey. It's very rewarding.
Yeah, and for anyone listening, you know, obviously we say it often, but support David. You know, he's got his channel, dwtruthwarrior.com, I think. He's got his premium section, and he's done so
Thanks,
many
guys.
premium
It's amazing.
premium presentations, you know, exploring these subjects in even greater detail. So, you know, go support this guy, you know, all this time and effort and energy that he puts into this research to share it, you know.
Yeah, we'll put both the links for David's premium membership and Unslaved in the brief. And I mean, to me, it's just like the most valuable act of self-love anyone can make, to go and absorb this information and to listen to these guys who are doing this work. And yeah, guys, thanks for listening. David, thank you again. And we'll see you next time.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you. Cheers, everybody.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean, fast forward and evolution.